everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, joined by Ken Weep from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is a special edition of the Kenny and Renny Show as we're diving into the Manitoba Moose. Can't exactly call it a series tee-up because this series has been teed up, and the Manitoba Moose find themselves deep into the rough and needed to pull off some miracle shots to find their way out of this. But I was reading in some of the comments before we got in here. I love this comment by Lynn Reimer who says, "Nah, K&R only ever have special guests on, never only sort of special guests." And that's exactly what we've got going on here today. Is we're going to be joined right away by Dave Minuk, who is, has his finger on the pulse of the Manitoba Moose like nobody else in this city. Derek Meech, who's with the organization, will join us as well. And then an old friend of ours, not calling him old, but boy, it was nice back in the days when he was in Winnipeg. He's moved on to cover the AHL full-time. Patrick Williams will join us to give us an idea of, not just what he's seen from the Moose, but from around the entire league. So we're going to get right into it, because what we found is when we've got quality guests like this, there's not a lot of time to waste. So let's bring in our good friend, our brother, Dave Minuk from the Illegal Curve podcast. Dave, do you mind sharing with everybody why you're at home and not at the rink as you usually would be?
Yeah, I'm fine, guys. I'm unfortunately I'm on IR. I got hit with a little thing called COVID just at the last second, and of course I'm not going to put anybody else at risk. So I was feeling a little bit crummy. Figured I'd do a test, and unfortunately, after 2.5 years of avoiding it, somehow it finally got its claws into me. So I'm good. I feel all right, but obviously not going to put anybody at risk. So I'm staying home. I'll be watching with a lot of other fans. Dan Fink do it on TSN3.
I hope I didn't give it to you, because I had it just a couple of weeks ago before you. But it's funny. I was going to say similar to you, avoiding it for 2 years, and then I saw that article that said if you don't have COVID yet, it's because you have no friends or no one to catch it from. So I went out shortly afterwards because I have a reputation to uphold. But Dave, let's just dive right into this.
Sure.
You've been watching this series. What have you seen from these first couple goals? People who will just be checking in will see that the Moose are down 2-0 and have their backs against the wall. What have you seen from this team? Have they met expectations? Have they missed expectations? What have you taken away from those first couple of games?
Well, I mean, a lot of frustration because they've controlled the play, which is what we've seen them do all year long. I mean, they've fired over 80 shots, at Devin Cooley, who looks like he's the second coming of Patrick Waugh right now, because he came into the series with he was a career .898 save percentage, and now he's around .950, .960. So he's been phenomenal. The quality of the shots, that's what head coach Mark Morrison hasn't loved. He's really kind of felt that the group needed to have more guys in front, more action to take away his eyes, and they haven't really been able to do that. Milwaukee has boxed them out fairly successfully throughout the course of this series. But I mean, the Moose have controlled the play. It's just, unfortunately, they're a young group. I'm not trying to make excuses, but they are a younger team in terms of playoff experience, and they just don't seem to have that edge in terms of when they make a mistake, it ends up in the back of the net. David Gustafson, there's 5 seconds left in the period. In the second period, they just tied the game 1-1. David Gustafson has the puck. There's a little bit of pressure behind him. He tries to fire it right up the middle. Gets knocked down, a blast from the point, and with 0.3 seconds to go, Milwaukee takes a 2-1 lead into the third period. Now the Moose end up tying it and losing late because, again, they made a bad play at the end of a power play. It was an anemic power play. The power play hasn't been great. They made a poor decision, and then unfortunately, one of the other factors is Mikkel Burden. Mikkel Burden, I said, this team, I've been saying it all year, will go as far as him, because even though they control the play, they really had to be concerned because, he's the wrong kind of goalie for this kind of system. He's the kind of goalie who likes a lot of action, a lot of volume, and he gets a little bit bored. And I think that's part of the problem for Mikkel Burden. He gets a little bit out of it, he gets a little antsy, and that's when mistakes can happen. So I didn't love a couple of the goals that have gone in against them. But overall, I mean, if you boil it down the first two games, they haven't been able to score enough.
Dave, listen to a bunch of the interviews throughout the course of the week. There seems to be a lot of belief, a lot of confidence. You've been around the team all year. Is this something where it will be easy for them to be calm and treat it? You got to find that balance between having the urgency, but not kind of abandoning the things that gave them success, except for the fact they were not able to puncture the back of the net behind Cooley in the first two games. And secondarily to that, what about the quality of the chances they've been generating? Sounds like there were a bunch of missed nets, and is that a byproduct of squeezing the stick a little bit when a goalie does get hot against them?
Yeah, I'll just answer your second one, Kenny. I think there is a bit of that. I think Cooley's a bit in their head, and that's why he's the starting goaltender for Game 3 tonight. I didn't expect anything other than him because he's been very good for them. Connor Ingram obviously came back, as did Cody Glass and Matthew Olivier. But my expectation was that they would start with Cooley tonight, and then if they don't, if the Moose end up winning or beating them badly, then they can always go to Ingram for Game 4 on Friday night. So I think Devin Cooley's in their head a little bit. I just think it's the quality of the chances. I really do. I think if the Moose, if you gave them some truth serum, they'd say, yeah, we're taking a lot of shots, but I mean they're easy to block. They're safe, right? Because they're shooting from 20, 30, 50 feet out. There's nobody in front. And one thing you have to give Milwaukee credit for, they haven't allowed the Moose to set up. So the Moose like I said, they'll control the puck, but Milwaukee attacks, and as a result. Yeah, I agree, Joe from Winnipeg. I blame Ezzy always. For anything bad that happens, you always blame Ezzy. So that's very true word. Truer words have never been spoken. So, you know what? Like I said, I think the Moose are. I don't think it's bravado, Ken. I don't think when you hear Declan Chisholm talk after the game, and he talked again this morning, and he's an interesting one because he spoke, but he's been taking maintenance days the last 2 days. So
he's going to be playing. Come on, he's going to be in there. He's got to be in there.
I would anticipate that he would be playing, but I'm just saying, they wouldn't have made him available if he wasn't going to play, right? So, but he was a question mark, obviously, with taking 2 maintenance days for the Moose. But I don't think it's arrogance. I don't think it's false confidence or bravado. Like I said, I really do think that these guys have a belief that they know, look, we're a good team. We've controlled the play. We haven't scored. We haven't generated enough quality chances. But we can, and we'll do it. And this is their home building. They've had a lot of success here. They've had a lot more wins and losses. So I do think that this team is confident in their ability to score.
You talk about that confidence in the ability to score. You also talk about the fact that, clearly the issue in this series is they haven't been able to score enough. Who, in your mind, on this roster does that fall on? I know the easy answer is to say, it falls on everyone. You got to get going as a team. Mm-hmm. But who do you think on that roster right now is looking themselves in the mirror and saying, if we're going to do this, I have to be better?
Everyone, but I'm not going to punt on the question, Sean. But I do believe it is incumbent on this team because, as we've talked about it on our show with you guys, or we've talked about it, privately. The reality is this is not a high-scoring team in the sense that there's not one guy who is dominating the scoring. And we went through it. Mikey Eyssimont, courtesy of the hat trick he had in the final game of the season against Abbotsford, he slipped into 83rd. Of the top scorers in the AHL. 83rd. Jeff Malott was the only other guy in the top 100, I believe, at around 93, 94. So it really is a collective effort. And I do put it on guys like Jeff Malott because he has been their driver. He is the guy from the inner slot. Nobody scores more from the inner slot than Jeff Malott. I'm pretty sure in the AHL, but for sure for this Moose team. So if you need someone who's big, who can score from that spot, I mean, Jeff Malott is your guy. I look at Mikey Eyssimont because he too is a guy who he wants that pressure. He got that taste of the NHL this year. He feels a little more confidence in his game, and he's kind of a shifty guy. So he aggravates the crap out of everybody else that he's playing. You should just watch when he's in the scrums. Anytime there's anything happening, that Mikey Eyssimont is in the middle of it for this Moose team, and of course David Gustafson and Morgan Barron. I mean, I think if any of those 4 guys really starts to produce, then suddenly you've got something with this Moose club.
Yeah, Morgan showed very well with the Winnipeg Jets, obviously, goal and assist in his last game. He had a goal the last game as well. What have you seen from him? I know, having covered the American League for 10 years, again, he had a great attitude going into the series, said all the right things. Sometimes the transition can be tough, especially after you've got your longest look in the NHL. How has Morgan played? And then as the co-conductors of the drivers of the Gus bus, we'll get to him in a second. But let's start with Barron and how he's played in the first couple of games.
I think he's looked good. I think you're right, Ken. There is a function of trying to get everybody back and comfortable again, playing with each other. Because for the most part, and that's one thing the Moose really can't. Well, they can't say, we have new guys, new faces. That's been their reality all year. This has been a plug-and-play group throughout the course of the season, and they've been very successful at it. So that's not really a concern for this Moose club because, again, throughout the course of the year, they've had to call guys up from the ECHL when, Jets had COVID situation, so the prospects went up to the Moose, or the guys obviously signed to NHL deals went up to the Jets, and they've had other guys step in. So I do think there is a little bit of getting used to. But again, when you have over 80 shots and your opponent has 40, you've controlled the play. You've looked good. You just haven't been able to finish. And that ultimately falls on your, I would say on the forwards. But the truth is, from this defensive group, right? Johnny Kovacevich, 11 goals. Leon Gavanke, 10 goals. Declan Chisholm, 9 goals. I might be slightly off, but I mean, those you've been able to produce a lot of scoring from the back end. So, but going back to Morgan, I think he's skated really well. I think he's looked really good. I think he's getting more comfortable. And the truth is, the one thing that this team has with Captain Jimmy Olney is confidence and a belief in each other. And Ken and I were talking about this. This Moose team has done this all year long, where they've been able to win 3 games. So, and they've done it against Milwaukee in November. So it's not an impossibility, but they're just going to take it one game at a time, as cliche as that sounds.
You touched on it a bit there, Dave, the idea that this team has had so much turnover and you've been able to kind of just march on and be consistent, surrounded by inconsistency. Do you feel that that's something that is going to serve them at this point, or is this where they find themselves, the frustration that you talked about right off the top of the show? Is this an entirely new animal that maybe we haven't seen how this Moose team can react to that?
Well, I mean, I would say that, Sean, if they were being dominated in the game, then maybe. But the problem is they just aren't scoring the goals. They've controlled the puck. I mean, what more can you want from a team to have possession, right? And that's all you can ask for. And look, has it been perfect? Have guys made the perfect play? No. And Milwaukee has been opportunistic, and Milwaukee and Manitoba played 12 times this season, right, in the regular. They know each other. They know each other's tells. They know each other's tendencies. These guys have done a lot of scouting on each other. So it's not like this is a new team that they have to kind of get used to. There's no real feeling out period, I think. Like this is a team that they should be absolutely prepared to play. So I really do just think it may just be nerves. It may just be the playoffs are a new animal for these teams, and they know that one mistake can end up in the back of your net, like it has, unfortunately, for the Manitoba Moose. And as a result, I think they're chasing a little bit, but playing in front of the home crowd, playing as well as they've played in this building, I really do think you're going to see a different animal from this Moose club tonight.
And then, Dave, let's dive into David Gustafsson. Obviously, he was banged up a bit late, sat out a couple of the games. How has he played since being back? And also, too, like bigger picture, we've talked about this before on your show, but how has he handled the frustration of, in his 2 call-ups ending so quickly due to injury, especially the one where the coach is asking his players to go to the net. He quite literally ran into the post and then got hurt.
You're going to be hard-pressed to find someone with a better attitude, maybe, an Eric Comrie, but David Gustafsson is right up there in terms of positivity and not lamenting his lot in life. He didn't come down to the Manitoba Moose and pout. He didn't say, I don't need to be here. He just takes everything like it is a challenge that needs to be in front of him and that he needs to conquer. So, Kenny, I don't think that there's been anything poor about his play. I just think it's unfortunate that he came up with an injury just before the season, wasn't able to play the last couple of games against Abbotsford, and as a result, and obviously wearing the yellow non-contact when the practices began before they left for Milwaukee. So, I mean, he may not be 100% when guys aren't necessarily. Look, the team lost Christian Reichel in the 30 seconds, or not even 30 seconds, into that game against Texas on the Tuesday. And he hasn't, originally Coach Morrison said, well, we're not really sure. Now it's a 6-week injury, right? So I don't know how significant the injury is to David, but like I said, I think there's a couple mistakes. Like I mentioned, the one that he just made that mistake of tossing the puck up the ice and it ended up in the back of their net. But overall, I mean, he's such a responsible guy that you just see what he's able to do on the PK and what he does on the PB and at 5-on-5, that you just know that there's a very good player there.
Jeff, or excuse me, Dave, you talked about the confidence that this team has at home, and Jeff Kabili says your home cooking is what the Moose need to get back into the series. I entirely agree with that. The one thing about this series returning here, and Cody Glass from Winnipeg entering this series, a player who has a ton that he wants to prove in order to get to the next level. There's no better circumstances to do it under than the AHL playoffs, and he walks into his hometown doing it. What kind of effect do you feel that Cody Glass could have on this series?
I mean, he can have a big one potentially, but the Moose have played Cody Glass at least 10 times with Milwaukee, and he can do damage to you. I mean, he's an interesting prospect. Everybody uses the buzzword right away because the guy isn't ripping up the NHL. But some guys just take a little bit longer. We've seen it with Jansen Harkins. We've seen it throughout the course of Mason Appleton. Guys just take a little bit of time to get to the NHL. So, Sean, I think he's definitely helps them. I mean, you can always augment your lineup, but Milwaukee is showing that right now. And again, I haven't seen what their lines are going to be for tonight's game, but my suspicion is, obviously they're going to probably put Glass in, maybe they'll put Olivier in, and as a result, you're going to have maybe a little bit more puck possession for Milwaukee, and maybe that's actually a good thing for this Moose team, because perhaps that counter punch is going to be a little bit better for this club, because like I said, there's probably a little frustration the way it's been playing right now. So perhaps if Mikhail Burden is more engaged in the game and he's making the stops, and then the Moose are counterattacking, it may end up being better for this team in the long run.
Awesome stuff, Dave. We're hoping that you feel better and enjoy the game tonight, and hopefully you get something in live before the season is over.
We'll see. I hope. But thanks for having me on, boys.
Yeah, take care. Take care, Dave. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise. Feel better. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, boys.
All right, we're going to go from Dave and we're going to go straight to Derek Meech. Hey, if you want the word on the organization, get inside the organization and ask someone in their organization right there. I wanted you to give me an idea, Derek, what you've seen from this group that gives you confidence in a moment where this team needs confidence to get to where it wants to go.
Yeah, well, it's been very impressive all season long watching these guys play. They're a team that believes in each other. These guys are a tight-knit group in the dressing room, and I know from behind the scenes, being around these guys constantly, just how much they care about what they're doing on a daily basis. So that's what gives me confidence in knowing that they're going to come out and respond. I think tonight, especially at home where they played so well all season long.
Meecher, what stood out about those first two games? Obviously, we know the story about the goaltending, but in terms of the shot generation, and what did you see on the offensive side from the Moose in those first two games from being in the building?
Yeah, well, obviously the shot volume wasn't an issue at all. Over 80 shots in 2 games. That's exactly what you want to do, especially on the road in a tough building in Milwaukee against a team that plays really well in front of their crowd. I thought it was a good way to start the series off for the Moose. Obviously frustrating not being able to get many pucks past Cooley. And that's been the name of the series here is Devin Cooley has stepped up in a big way in the absence of Connor Ingram. And it's one of those things that as a player it could be frustrating, definitely, when you're shelling that many shots at the net and not getting results. But at the same time, you got to look at the big picture here a little bit too. And Milwaukee is a team that has some good veteran guys, especially on the back end there that battle hard. You weren't seeing a lot of second chance opportunities around Cooley. I think their defensemen actually did a pretty good job of taking away some sticks at the side of the net and doing a good job of deterring some of that action around the crease area. And so I think that's going to be a bit of the challenge for the Moose in tonight's hockey game is getting shots, continuing that flow of shots to the net, but where are you getting those shots and are you able to create some of those second, third chance opportunities that make it difficult on a goaltender to have to move side to side and battle very hard in his crease. So I think that's going to be a big factor in the game tonight. But aside from even the offensive output and the shots on net, I think a very key part of tonight's game is going to be who's going to defend well, who's going to defend the best. Because we all know that, if you're defending well, if you're doing what needs to be done in your own end, if you're playing with 5 in your own end and coming underneath the puck with speed through the neutral zone, that's what really creates some of those uncomfortable situations for opposition defensemen trying to gap up in the right ways and different things like that. So I think it's going to be a hard-fought battle. It's going to have to be the same mindset on that shot volume. But this is the playoffs, and no goals are easy to score. And so if you're on a team that has historically been a team that scores by committee, you have to be creative and find some of those ways to get in those areas to score those hard playoff hockey goals.
There's no greater pressure than playoff hockey itself. So maybe that's enough in the way that Cooley has performed. Maybe he's shown that he's up to the task. But I wonder, this Ingram returning, that angle, especially what he did at the NHL level, it fascinates me. Now, he's going to back up tonight. But, Dave was on here talking and saying this is essentially one of these situations, the way he sees it, that they're going to go with Cooley until Cooley fails, right? So if Cooley fails tonight, or loses tonight, I shouldn't say fails, Ingram's going to get his opportunity. But the thing I find fascinating about that, isn't that a level of pressure that has been put on Cooley's shoulders that didn't exist before this game here in this series, and can that be exploited?
Yeah, well, I mean, Devin Cooley has played against the Manitoba Moose in the season series and done pretty well in that. And obviously, when you have a goalie tandem that is competing hard and putting sort of that competitive pressure on each other, I think that's going to benefit in a lot of different ways. But yes, I think there is a bit of more pressure now that Connor Ingram is going to be sitting on the bench. To make sure that if Devin Cooley's, what he's thinking is that he's got to make sure that he's on top of his game if he wants to stay in that crease.
Also super interesting, like goalies get hot, they play back to back, and 2-day break doesn't seem like much, but when a goalie's out of his mind, you would probably bet Cooley would have preferred the game to be Sunday, right, Meecher? I mean, that could be something where you're not going to be lacking confidence, but it can go just as quickly. You can get cold as quickly as you can get hot, can't you?
Oh, for sure. And, that's the thing about the American Hockey League playoffs is sometimes you have these stretches between games. Like 2 games isn't that bad in the American Hockey League. Sometimes you get up to 3 and 4 days in between games. So, but you're exactly right. As a hockey player, as a guy that likes to compete every night, these guys taking a bit of time off, you have to make sure that, especially going on the road, a bit of travel involved. I'm not sure if they skated yesterday or not, but you have to make sure that you get on the ice and the mental side of your game's there, but also you're pushing your body in the right ways and preparing properly to give yourself the best success.
The way that there's so much turnover in the roster this year is a perfect example of kind of, maybe it's hard to build up hate with other teams or other players if people are constantly coming in or out. But I take a look at this situation, and I don't think that the Jets have ever had a hotter rivalry than the one they had with the Nashville Predators around the 2017, 18, 19 seasons. How would you describe the rivalry between these two teams?
Well, it's heated up all season long, and as you mentioned, these guys have played each other quite a few times this season and had a really good battle in every one of those games. And so you saw in the first 2 games in Milwaukee, it carries right over into that first series. The first game, there's a bit of tentativeness in the first 10 15 minutes of that first period, but after whistles, you're starting to see guys going after each other, pushing and shoving. The emotion level was ramped up pretty quickly in those first 2 games. And you better believe that with Carl Taylor, behind the bench for the Milwaukee Admirals, he's going to have these guys focused and ready to go in a game where they understand how good of a record the Moose have at home, and that's what you work so hard for during the season is to establish yourself and make it very difficult for away teams to come in your building, because at times like this, it becomes a huge opportunity to jump on these teams and to ramp up that physicality early in the hockey game.
Meecher, one of the interesting parts about the American Hockey League is that roster fluctuation, but sometimes it can be a challenge for guys to come back to the American League after successful stints, especially late in seasons. How have Morgan Barron and Dylan Sandberg handled that? You would have seen it whether it was in St. John's or Texas. That can sometimes be a challenge with the integration. How have those 2 guys played in the first 2 games? What do you expect from them here tonight when you get to a 3rd game where maybe you're feeling a bit more comfortable?
Yeah, it is difficult. I think that there's a different pace, and a different style of game. The American Hockey League, you could argue it's a little more physical, a little more individual effort has to be made at times. Not all the guys are in the right spots all the time. In the NHL, it's quick. You guys are right there. You make the pass, especially in your own end as a young defender. In certain ways, it makes it a little bit easier. So, I think Dylan Sandberg has done such a great job all season long here. Really making his presence known and getting a good opportunity with the Jets is awesome to see. And I think both of those guys, Morgan Barron and Dylan Sandberg, have looked good. Again, it's one of those things where you have to adjust your level a little bit. You have to do the things mentally that are going to help you succeed on a nightly basis. And again, it's at the end of the day, it's playoff hockey, and it's the game is taken to another level. So getting that adjustment down pat in the first 2 games, I think these guys are going to come out here tonight guns a-blazing, and that's what you hope anyway.
Derek, you've been on both sides of that in your career personally, being at the AHL level, trying to fight your way up and then coming down. I'm interested in the idea of, the players at the heart of it who are trying to play their way up into the NHL. Clearly, as you pointed out, the playoffs are an entirely different animal, and I'm sure general managers and coaches want to see how those players respond to that pressure. And so I'm wondering for those guys who feel like they're on the bubble, the Barons, the Sandbergs, the Hainelas, is there an added level of pressure in the playoffs in the AHL when you're trying to get over the hump that maybe wouldn't even exist in the NHL? Because when you're in the NHL, you can just focus on the games. But now you're kind of very aware that how you perform in these very tense moments has a really great effect on your future.
Yeah, I think there is certain pressure to that for sure. And as a player, I think the mindset has to sort of go away from the pressure side of it to more of the opportunity, and it is a challenge. It's part of the landscape of what's going on. You have to make sure that you're prepared in the right ways, and I think the biggest thing for guys that are in that situation where you're coming up, you're coming down, is to stick with the game that you know how to play. It doesn't matter if you're in the NHL or if you're in the American Hockey League. There's a reason why that you've been scouted and that you've been, highly touted your whole career, is because you've played a certain way, and to get away from that, really doesn't make a lot of sense. Stick with the way what's brought you success in your career thus far, and focus on the good things that you do on the ice. And I think that. It becomes a very good opportunity, and this is the time where you can turn some heads and sort of cement how important you can be to the organization.
Sure, obviously we talked a lot about the defense core this year. It's such an interesting spot. The Jets have gone from being defensively deficient to having a surplus, and now you have 4 different guys jump up, and now there's not room for all of them. But how do those guys handle themselves at the 2 levels? What's maybe stood out to you? I mean, maybe we'll go one by one. I mean, Johnny Kovacevich maybe has been the guy who came the furthest this year, had a strong training camp, got his first taste. And I guess you could also say that about Declan Chisholm, a guy who I was impressed with last year with his mobility. I know you've seen him a lot. Maybe let's just drill into those 2 guys first before we get to Heinola. What stood out to you about Kovacevich and Chisholm in terms of their development? A, how they handled the jump to the NHL when they got their chance, and B, how they've played at this level here.
Well, yeah, it's been very impressive, and I think especially Jonathan Kovacevich, he's talked about how he wants to be a two-way defenseman, really add a level to his game where he can get up in the play, and he's proved that by putting a lot of goals on the board this season and not being part of the power play. And Declan Chisholm, again, a guy that, he's offensively gifted. That's pretty clear on the blue line along with Leon Gavanka. Those 2 have some really good chemistry going, and they're dangerous from the point. But the thing that I've seen from both of those guys, Kovacevich and Declan Chisholm, is the way they've progressed in their own end. I think that making those little plays, stopping the play quickly, turning that puck around and getting it going the right way without turning the puck over and ending up spending a lot of time in your own end. I think that's been a very big key to both of those guys' success. Jonathan Kovacevich, more of the bigger shutdown sort of defenseman, doing a good job on the penalty kill. Moose penalty kill has been fantastic all season long, and a big part of that has been because of Jonathan Kovacevich as well. So really, these guys are starting to develop in a really good way, but not only offensively, but on both sides of the rink. And I think that's been really key to their development this season.
Ken, you want to take them through the other 2 defensemen you wanted to talk about?
Oh, sorry. We talked about Heinola. It was Sandberg we started with, but Heinola, again, it also can be challenging, right? Because he had to sit a lot. He has that offensive side. There are times at the American League level, I wouldn't say he looks bored, but the engagement can sometimes be tough, right? I mean, again, you don't have to use the words, but I will. What have you seen from him in terms of his ability to ramp up his game and to kind of can take over at times? Because the biggest thing for him right now is he needs to be dominant at this level. We know that he's probably ready next year, but he needs to be dominant at this level given his skill set, doesn't he?
I think he does. Yeah, I think there's a side to that. Myself being a smaller defenseman when I was coming through and having power play opportunities and different things, I think that you do have to make sure that you're playing to your strengths. And Ville Heinola is a guy that is very highly skilled. You see the way he moves across that blue line and those individual moves that he makes coming around defenders, finding shot lanes, that's stuff that he's just continued to get stay very good at during this whole season. But again, I think as a young defender, the key is to be able to handle yourself in your own end. If you can't play defense, especially at the National Hockey level, in your own end, and make sure you're moving that puck up the ice with efficiency, then it's tough to break through. And so I've seen his game develop in a positive way this season in that regard. And I think that he's a guy that just has to keep his axe to the grindstone and continue to work on that side of the game. And again, defense is a position that takes a little bit of time to mature in, and it's all part of the process here. Ville Heinola is a high character guy too, well liked around the room, and he continues to impress on a daily basis here. And I think we look forward to a lot of good hockey out of Ville too.
Derek, one of my favorite parts about watching playoff hockey at any level is kind of the chess match going on between coaches, the in-series adjustments that kind of make things, can turn a series on its head. I don't know if we should expect that from the Moose and an entirely different turn, but I'm wondering if you've seen much in the way of in-series adjustments, or has Milwaukee kind of come into this with a game plan that they've been getting by with and kind of white-knuckled their way through the first two games?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, the Moose, I don't think in game two especially came out in that game and had a first period that they were super happy with. I think that's why you saw the second period. I don't think Milwaukee spent more than a minute in the Manitoba Moose zone, getting 3 shots on net in that period. And the response from the Moose in that period was huge. So those are the kind of things that you see in game, those adjustments that you're talking about, hemming them in their own end, especially on a long change opportunity where you have to realize that, you're in a situation where it's a must win and you have to continue to push. I thought they did a great job in that game of responding in that second period. And I think that's where the frustration lies a little bit is when you're pouring on that kind of pressure and not getting the results you need. It can be a frustrating thing. And so that's going to be important, along with, again, staying disciplined, with some additions to this group in tonight's hockey game, namely Cody Glass. You want to make sure that you're keeping Milwaukee off the power play. And on the other side of things, making sure that the power play is coming out there with a good mindset to try to capitalize on some of those opportunities, because it could be the difference maker at the end of the night.
Mitra, just going back to Heinola for 1 second, I love that exchange when he was up at the podium with Nate Schmidt late in the season, and Nate was telling him about how long it took him to become a regular, and he's like, how old are you, young man? And then shared the experience of the Capitals trading for someone at the deadline to knock him into the press box. Like, Ville was paying so close attention. Did you ever have a moment like that in Detroit? You're surrounded by Lidstrom and Cronwall and those guys. Can you remember a moment like that where, to me, it's not that it wasn't there before, but to me that was like a light switch kind of moment for Ville, where he realized that maybe he's closer than it appears, even though you wish it had happened yesterday, kind of thing?
Yeah. For sure. And again, that's, some of the frustration sometimes as a young player, you feel like you should be there, and you put that internal pressure on yourself to try to succeed in that way. But again, it's all a process here. You can't rush the situation, especially, as I mentioned, for the defending back end. As a young player coming up, there's a lot to learn. And, it wasn't uncommon to see guys spend 3 seasons at least in the American Hockey League, especially back when I played. Maybe it's a little bit different nowadays. You're seeing younger guys more consistently break through. But there's still a lot of players that are grinding away and doing what they need to do to try to give themselves an opportunity at the next level. And I think patience is a big key there. And, sometimes that's hard as a young player to hear, you got to be patient, like stick with it. And, sometimes you end up almost overworking in certain situations. I remember there's a lot of situations where as a young player, you do everything you possibly can, to give yourself the best opportunity. And sometimes that's even a little too much at times. There's a certain level where you sort of settle into, and the game just starts coming to you a little bit. And so I think you're right. I think Ville Heinola is very close to that. And again, it's just a matter of having the right support around him, which I think the Moose do a good job of. I think the coaching staff's been fantastic. Mark Morrison, Eric Dubois, and Marty Johnson, with all their players, really being patient and letting them, come into their own games and learn as much as they can, so that when they're able to finally take that next step, they're stepping in and they're having a lot of success.
That patience you're talking about is, an overarching patience as they try to get somewhere in their career. But clearly patience is going to apply to the Manitoba Moose trying to make sure they can, break the dam and get in there. I'm wondering, from what you know of this team, who are the players right now who would you expect are taking that frustration and set to channel it in the right way and maybe break this series open back in the Moose direction?
Well, I think it's got to start with your top guys, and again, that's a cliche thing to say, but in situations like this, the Moose have a ton of depth on this team. You look through the lineup, and really it's a well-rounded group of forwards out there, along with those defenders in the back end that pour on the pressure from the blue line. So I think guys like Jeff Malott, CJ Cease, Austin Magansky, David Gustafson, obviously Morgan Barron just coming down, getting a better feel for the organization now. He seems like he's really settled in. These guys are going to be big factors here in tonight's hockey game, along with Jimmy Olney, the captain. He's been fantastic all year long. Has been great, again, with, as we talked about, Ville Heinola, paired up with him a little bit as of late. So, it's going to be important for those guys to come out and have a big 60 minutes of hockey. And again, I think that's the key too, is coming out. I think the start in tonight's game is going to be a big key. Back on home ice, the crowd's going to be excited, and keeping your emotions in check, but making sure that you're pouring on pressure early and putting some doubt into this Admirals team, if you can, to get things going in the right direction.
Derek, you touched on the coaching staff there, and I'm curious, and Mark Morrison's not new to the organization, but this is his first chance to be a head coach at this level. It's been a revolving door of players, different circumstances, COVID, everything else. What stood out to you about how he was able to get the buy-in and establish that winning culture over the course of the season this year?
Yeah, well, I have a pretty good experience with Mark myself in St. John's for the Ice Caps. He was our assistant coach, our D coach at the time there, and I found him to be a very positive, part of my experience while I was with the Ice Caps. I really enjoyed my interactions with Mark, and I think the key with him is he's really good at empowering players. He's not coming at you and barking at you and ordering you around all the time. He's interested in knowing sort of what's on your mind and what you're thinking, so that you can come together in a consensus and go forward in a positive way. That's really beneficial to not only the player but the team in general. So I think Mark has done a fantastic job at that. His even keel nature, and I would say laid back is maybe not the right word, but just he's got a good way of keeping things sort of right in the middle, but while also making sure that guys are accountable and buying into the program. And I think it's been pretty obvious throughout the season that that's worked pretty well with this group of guys, responding very well, and I don't see it changing at all in tonight's hockey game. I think he's gonna leave it to the players to decide what they want to do in tonight's hockey game, and I think that's a big thing as a head coach is having that confidence in your players that they're going to dig down deep in these hard situations and come up with a good answer.
Derek, I'm going to coach this next question by saying sometimes I hate asking this question because usually there's just often not an answer to it. But it's been brought up a couple times. It's been a theme here about how well this team plays at home. Usually the answer to this question is if we knew we'd bottle it, we'd just carry it forward. But every once in a while, someone can give a pretty good answer. Do you have a good answer on why this team has done so well at home?
Well, I think, these guys, again, they've gone through a pretty tough period of time in the last couple of years here, not being able to put a full season together, playing out of the Iceplex for a certain period of time. And then I think finally getting in front some fans back down at Canada Life Center has been a huge boost to morale in a lot of different ways for not only the players, but everyone around the city. And so I think these guys have really embraced that. I think they've come out and realized that there's a big opportunity here, as a hockey player to enjoy what you're doing. And I think that they've done a great job with that. If you're the times that you're not enjoying yourself is usually when you're not doing too well and when you're losing. So, to make sure that you're having the right mindset on a nightly basis, most 90% mental is coming out and preparing the proper way to come out in front of your home fans and put on a show. And these guys have done a great job of that all season long.
Derek, that was a great answer to a stinker of a question. Thank you for saving me there. Sorry, back to you, Ken.
Meecher, you played in front of a lot of different goalies over the years, different personalities, different styles. I mean, we've seen glimpses of Mikhail Burden's personality. We know that he's maybe not quite as adventurous maybe outside of his crease this year by design, but still very intense individual, physical, athletic, all those things. How would you describe his development over the course of the year, and how do you think his mindset is suited to a kind of a win or go home type of scenario here?
Yeah, I think Birdie's he's been great all season long. I think Drew McIntyre has done a great job with him in taking over for Rick St. Croix, which is not an easy thing to do. Obviously, Mikhail Burden and Rick had a really good relationship, but the changeover has been sort of seamless in that regard. And so, Mikhail is a guy that he works very hard. In practices, he saw that even coming home after those couple tough games in Milwaukee. But the thing I was impressed about with Mikhail is he's a guy that sort of almost thrives on getting some shots on him. You see him sometimes in the net there when he's not getting the volume of shots. You start to see him kind of get out of his net a little bit and try to get involved any way he can, because that's his nature. He's got that fiery side to him where he wants to compete, he wants to be in the game. And I thought he did a good job in those two games of managing, like you said, not coming out of his net, not being in any risky situations, playing the puck well, but settling in and trying to be patient with what was happening in a difficult situation where you get 3 shots in a second period in that hockey game, and that's difficult on a goaltender to sort of stand there the whole period and then have to come out in the third and put up a good effort. So I've been impressed with him all season long. He's done a good job. He had a bit of an injury situation that he had to battle through, and I thought since then he's come out, like he said, with the fire in his eyes, and he's going to be a huge factor in this hockey game tonight as well.
Derek, last one from me. You talked about the need earlier on of staying off the PK with a guy like Cody Glass coming back. Just for our fans here who are interested in Winnipeg prospects and a Winnipeg boy, what level of danger does Cody Glass bring to this series?
Well, he just adds another level, especially from the half wall there. This is a Milwaukee team that, again, they're heavy around the front of the net. They like to get traffic in front. But when you have Cody Glass on the half wall, he's able to see those skilled plays, those seam plays. If are given to him, he can pick through those plays and set his teammates up for success. So, he's a dynamic guy that can bring the puck up with good pace. And, he's always someone that you have to have your eye on the power play. And he's had some success, especially in this building in this season already against the Moose. So, again, he's a guy that you have to make sure that you're focused on and you know where he is so that he doesn't put one in the back of the net on you.
A quick one lineup-wise for the Moose. What is it going to mean to have Mikey Asimont jump up to that top line, Meecher, with David Gustafsson and Morgan Barron? I mean, it brings a little bit of a different dynamic, but what do you expect from him jumping up on that line for a team that's looking for a bit more offense here tonight?
Yeah, well, offense has been sort of the talk around the room a little bit, just making sure that they want to capitalize on some of these shots that they're putting towards the net. So I think in practice there was a big focus on making sure that the shot mentality is there and not only getting the puck on net but scoring some goals. And I saw Mikey working very hard in the last couple of practices, and again, he's a guy that's been so effective throughout the season on his tenacity on the puck. He's able to get it on the forecheck, recover pucks, and dish it in a really skilled way to his line mates. And so when you have guys like David Gustafson in the front of the net, Morgan Barron that scored a late goal in that game too, to pull the Moose even in that, he's a big factor there too. And to get pucks on those guys' sticks is going to be huge. And also Mikey has the ability to get under the skin as well. He can ramp up the physicality. He's not afraid, to get in there and make his presence known. And so that'll be a very interesting line to watch tonight.
Derek, we know you're busy on game days. It means a ton to us that you stop by to share your expertise with both us and our audience, for the sake of you, for the sake of the organization, for the sake of Winnipeg hockey fans. I'm hoping things turn in this series, so we have lots to talk about going forward. Thank you so much for joining us.
Enjoy the broadcast tonight too. Enjoy the broadcast.
Yes, I will. It'll be fun to do with Daniel Fink here. And again, you guys have an awesome show, and I appreciate you. I'm honored to be on here with you guys. So thank you.
We're honored to have you. Thank you, Derek.
Have fun tonight.
And we're going to bring in Patrick Williams last but definitely not least, as plugged in as the Jets in the AHL. Patrick, from everything that I've been hearing, from the little bit that I've seen of it, it sounds quite a bit like the Manitoba Moose have maybe deserved a better fate, that maybe they've been the better team, but it hasn't come that way on the scoreboard. Now, I don't know if you agree with that, but I'm wondering if there's maybe something you've seen missing from their game, that maybe they're right where they should be.
Yeah, it's a good point that you bring up. Mark Morrison, head coach of the Moose, has really harped on the idea that they're not getting enough traffic in front of the net. They're not getting rebounds. They're not, making that life difficult for goalie Devin Cooley through the first 2 games. So yeah, on the shot clock, it looks great. 86 shots in 2 games, and you're thinking, just law of averages, they should go through. But a lot of them are long distance shots. A lot of them are not through traffic, and any sort of rebounds he's scooping up, and there's nobody there to disrupt him or make his life more difficult.
Is it a sustainable thing for Cooley, Patrick? I mean, you look at this guy. Here's a guy who was like 890s during the year. All of a sudden, he looks like Jordan Binnington on a heater. I mean, I was just talking to Aaron Sims before, and he mentioned it was hard for him to get into a rhythm this year, just given how much Connor Ingram played. But he won a couple important games late, and he kind of went into the playoffs with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I mean, Connor Ingram led the league, 55 games played this year, an absolute workhorse. Quite frankly, I think at this point, Connor Ingram has outgrown the American Hockey League. He's just kind of biding his time until a spot opens up in Nashville. So for a guy like Cooley, he's kind of had to be the understudy in a situation where I think with a lot of other teams, he would be, if not the main guy in net, he'd at least be playing 30-something games a year. And so he hasn't had that opportunity. Is it sustainable? I mean, this, as you know from all your years covering the Moose, this is a strange league. It's unpredictable in the sense of how players' growth can really fast-track first, second, third years of their pro career. So he only has to win one more game here, best of 5 format. So, I think it's sustainable for now anyway.
I mean, I get it, Patrick. You ride the hot hand. So Devin Cooley has been, we keep talking about all these shots in his face he's gotten through. So I entirely understand. But at the same time, to your point, Connor Ingram looks like he's outgrown this league. Never mind the fact that he went in and went up against one of the most dangerous teams in the NHL, and at least for a bit, really more than held his own, made that series potentially more interesting than it should have been. Is there any level surprise in you that Devin Cooley gets to start in this game when you've got, a nuclear weapon sitting on the bench behind him?
I would just say I think Devin Cooley's probably on a very short leash. I think this is a chance where, hey, you're up 2-0. You have 3 chances to close out this series. If he's not great tonight, you come right back with Connor Ingram. Connor Ingram now has a couple days to kind of reacquaint himself with the AHL, maybe come down from that NHL high that he's been on for the last week or so, and then be ready to go in game 4 if necessary. So I think in this case, Milwaukee is playing with house money a little bit, and they're not in a situation where they necessarily have to go right away to Ingram. Then again, you never want to fire too much in the playoffs because it can get away from you, especially in a short series like this. But I think that's the thinking with Milwaukee tonight.
Patrick, you touched on Mark Morrison's demeanor during the course of the things. I know you jump on a lot of the Zoom calls and check out a lot of the availabilities. Just fans in the market here, I don't think are very familiar with Mark and his story. He's been around the league different times. He worked for both Randy Carlyle and Dallas Aikens with the Anaheim Ducks. What stood out to you about how he's handled and navigated what were some challenging circumstances for the Manitoba Moose this season?
Yeah, it's been interesting seeing him really kind of get his own shot at this level to run his own show. He's a low-key personality. He's not, as you know, sometimes at this level, coaches can get a little bit into that self-promotion mode. They are one step away from the NHL, and sometimes they promote themselves as much as the players. But he's low-key. He doesn't really ever draw any sort of attention or credit toward himself. And he's done a great job. I mean, on paper, it's not a great roster, but they play really well as a team, very cohesive, and it's kind of a scoring by committee approach as well. So a lot of that, I think, has to go on him and what he's been able to do coming in and getting, an okay, but not certainly by any stretch of the imagination, dazzling roster. Getting them into the playoffs, number one, and number two, having a situation where they have home ice in the first round.
I find this interesting because you take a look at the series and you take a look at the shots, and I think people are thinking, what's happening with Milwaukee isn't sustainable, and Manitoba just needs that little bit of a break. But to your point about this being not an overly offensive roster and having, doing the scoring by committee thing, I'm wondering if maybe this is something that either the Moose should have expected, that scoring could dry up, and if you don't have the guys to kind of lead the way, it could get you there, or if this, should the Moose be able to pull off a comeback, is something that they're going to need to be concerned about, or maybe their Achilles heel going forward for the rest of the playoffs.
Well, yeah, I guess scoring by committee can go one of two ways, right? In some cases you see a team that's kind of maybe a top-heavy team, 1 or 1.5 lines, and if you can shut that line down, there's not much behind it. The Moose are diametrically opposite setup in the sense that they're pretty solid top to bottom, but there's not that game breaker that they have. So, I do think it's a challenge for them. And we're really seeing that, when you get into these short series, I mean, in some cases there was a best of 3 for certain teams to play into this top 16. So that was kind of the most exaggerated effect of, where it's a quick series and just 1 or 2 bad games and you're done. For the Moose, if they do manage to somehow get past Milwaukee, and it's not looking great right now for them, you'd be more or less likely to run into Alex Line with the Chicago Wolves, who's a top goalie in the league. He can take it serious himself. A couple years ago when he was with Philadelphia's system, he had a 5 overtime win. So that's the kind of goalie you'd be going up against. And when he gets on a roll, he's almost unbeatable. So I think for the Moose, this has been their Achilles heel. And, when it drives up, it really drives up, I think, for them. And that's kind of where they're at right now.
Patrick, I'm curious for your take on the defense corps. We obviously have talked about them a lot. A lot of guys got their first chance this year. Some others got a little bit more run than they've had in the past. And again, this is such a rare situation where at times this year the Jets or the Moose have run 3 defensemen on a power play. Given how creative and offensively gifted they are, what's your overall take of the group and maybe gauge their NHL readiness?
Yeah, it's interesting because honestly, for Manitoba, a lot of the play, that offensive play, kind of starts in that back end, more so than a lot of other teams. And like you said, the 3 defensemen power play, and it's a dynamic group. I mean, you really look up and down that group. Kovacevich this season, Declan Chisholm, obviously Ville Heinola, right down the list. I mean, it's as good a blue line, I think, as any in this league. They're just asked to do a lot, though. They're asked to generate a lot offensively because up front it is a little bit thin. So they've been able to walk that balance. I think to their credit, they've been able to drive a lot of that play, but also obviously still take care of things on their own end. So definitely their strongest asset for sure.
I'm glad that our chat room brought this up. Tico Napoli says they need Perfetti, and David Martino says Perfetti would look good, but the replacements get a chance. Maybe this is a good way to kind of get your idea of kind of a backwards way of finding the value of a player like Perfetti. We've seen what he's done at the NHL level, but from what you saw of him earlier this season, what effect do you think, and we know it's not going to happen, so it's a what if question, but what effect could a player like Cole Perfetti have had on this series if he was in it?
Big effect. And you look around the league, a lot of teams have their first round type picks going through this experience. Obviously, Cody Glass is an example of that. Jacob Peltier out in Stockton, he was a Calgary pick, had a fantastic rookie season. For a lot of those types of players, this is kind of the finishing school, going through a long playoff run. I mean, Marty Natchez went through that a couple years ago with Charlotte before he went up full time to Carolina. And it's a great test, right? And this is, you'll hear coaches say this nonstop at this level. This is the best hockey you're going to get anywhere outside of the NHL, the Calder Cup playoffs. It's that kind of that final test, that final hurdle that you like to see a player handle before it's time to make that full-time jump. So it would have been great. And I think certainly for Perfetti, it would have been really helpful to see him in that environment. But like you said, wasn't to be.
Yeah, one of those times where the rule that's meant to protect the player actually hurts the player, right? Yeah. I mean, it's one of these strange things. Patrick, just staying on Perfetti briefly, do you see him more as a center at the NHL level, or is he best suited to play on the wing where he spent the majority of his time here this year? I know I was able to watch him a few times last year in the American League level when he was playing center. We know about his distribution ability and vision and IQ. Where do you think he's best suited to play when he gets comfortable in being a regular?
I mean, ideally, I just feel that centers are harder to find. So if you can make that work, that's the ideal way to go. I think obviously wing is a little bit of an easier transition, especially early on before he does kind of find his way completely in the NHL. So I'd like to see him start in the wing and then take it from there. If it looks like he's capable of more, then you slowly kind of hand more responsibility over to him, let him try that centerman role and go from there. But I think, obviously it's a huge jump for players to come from the American Hockey League up to the NHL and do so on a full-time basis and be consistent. That's the biggest thing for players. I think that's the biggest difference between a high-end AHL player and someone in the NHL a lot of times is that consistency. So anything I think you can do to facilitate and smooth that transition to the NHL on a full-time basis for a player, not just Perfetti, really anybody. I think that's where the wing would definitely probably be an easier move for him.
There was a fun moment in the Jets training camp this year where Johnny Kovacevich, who's just an absolute gem of a human being, was out talking with us. And before he'd come up, Paul Maurice had been in before that and had referred to him and said, like, this guy's going to play in the NHL one day. And I remember asking him a question and saying, Paul Maurice just said this about you. And you could tell he was floored and you could tell it meant a ton to him. And he was thinking to himself, like, I know everyone dreams about it, but it was this moment of affirmation for him that you could just see it kind of brought him alive. When you take a look at this, Manitoba Moose defense core, I think most of us see Sandberg did well this year. He's heading on his way. I think most of us suspect Heinola. How many of these guys do you think are going to end up being full-time NHLers?
Well, 4, I would say. I would say Sandberg, Heinola, Chisholm. I really like his game, and Kovacevich. I actually had Kovacevich number 3 on my ballot this year for the awards for defenseman, entire league. And it was a good year for young defensemen in this league, but I found him that impressive. I found him, he's that kind of player where that comfort level, he's at 100% comfort level at the American League level. And he's just able to handle it. And you see that composure. And that's always one of the first things I think to look for a defenseman in the American Hockey League is that level of composure. And I'll give you someone like Jake Bean. That was one of the first things that he showed early on in his career with coming into the American Hockey League as a first-round pick was just that calm, right? And you put him out there and you put him out for 20, 25 minutes a night, and he's just more than anything else, he's calm and composed. And I think that's what NHL GMs love to see from their young defensemen.
Now let's move between the pipes, Patrick. Obviously, Eric Comrie is such a feel-good story this year, finally getting his chance. I mean, Mikhail Burton, we know everything about the personality, but such a unique situation, or not unique, it's an interesting situation for the Jets. He's going to be on a one-way deal. He is no longer waivers exempt. Is this a guy who could be ready to battle for the backup job, or how do you see Burton's future kind of playing out, Patrick?
Yeah, like personally for me, I mean, if I were the Moose, he kind of gives me a little bit of a heartburn watching him play because you see things that obviously like there's all the talents there, but then he'll do something completely out of left field, right? Where you're like, what are you thinking, right? So for me, that's where I find that hard to watch at times, and obviously that would only be exaggerated and magnified at the NHL level, where all sorts of scrutiny is on you, and players will make you pay if you make a bad decision. Just come out, for a loose puck, for example, right? You're just like, what are you doing, right? Like, so sometimes I think he's a little bit too loose in that regard. I'm such a Comrie, fan of his story, so like I want to see him really kind of make this a long-term fit for him. But Burton, I think, will certainly, he'll make a push. But for me, he's still, there's just that I don't know, that level of, I'm not entirely comfortable with him if I'm the Winnipeg Jets or frankly the Manitoba Moose at times.
Just switching over to a Winnipeg guy and Cody Glass, he was on earlier talking about, and I think this is so tough as a player, especially when you're a player who kind of gets picked further up the draft than you're expected to be picked. Then all of a sudden when people start attaching the bust label to you, I think that has got to be so hard to shake mentally. Where do you see Cody Glass's game, and is there still a path to being a significant player in the NHL ahead of him?
I think there is. I think there's been a big, this is maybe the last 5-6 years, realization that players don't necessarily follow their own path. There's not, a hard, cut and dry timeline for player, whereas, well, he's not up there in 2 years, then write him off. And that used to be something that happened all the time in the American Hockey League. I mean, Weber, that as well as anybody. Players would get that label. Well, he's not in the NHL after 1 year. Cast him aside. I still think there's an NHL player there. I think Nashville and their system is a great fit for him. Carl Taylor, the head coach there in Milwaukee. That is a pipeline that has sent tons and tons of players to the Nashville Predators for years. If there's a team that can kind of fine tune those rough edges in his game and get him to be that complete 200-foot two-way player, I think Milwaukee, Carl Taylor, the Nashville system overall is the best chance of doing so.
Patrick, we talked about him at the time of the trade for Andrew Kopp. Morgan Barron, maybe would you be willing to share what the Hartford coaches felt about him? And then I'm also curious, we saw what kind of a role he took on with the Jets. What's impressed you most about him? And do you see him as being maybe a middle six player, or a guy who's maybe just on the verge of becoming an NHL regular after getting his longest taste at this level after the trade?
Yeah, the first thing that everybody brings up with Hartford, for example, was the maturity level. Even when he came in right off the bat, coming in from Cornell, was like, who is this kid? He's like coming in as a composure of a 30-something type player rather than just a kid coming off a college campus. So a real good leader in that way, kind of a low-key personality, but leads by example, and quickly earned the respect of Chris Knobloch there in Hartford. Somebody who's been at the NHL level, somebody who coached Connor McDavid, so he knows, what it's like to deal with younger players. And that's the thing for me. I think ideally, if you're the Winnipeg Jets, he fits in really nice as like a good, solid third line centerman who won't hurt you. And maybe, if he really kind of reaches his peak, he can be a little bit of an offensive contributor. But I think first and foremost, you're going to get somebody, I think, that maybe would be sort of an Andrew Kopp 2.0. Maybe that's the ceiling for him, but he's not there yet, obviously. But I really like the pickup for the Jets. I thought they did quite well, considering they were kind of the hands were a little bit tied with that deal to be able to pull Morgan Barron, somebody I think that had a lot of fans within the New York Rangers. I think that was a big move by the Jets.
Patrick, when we decided to do our very first Kenny and Renny AHL show, we thought, we got to do it with a bang. And if we want credibility, you got to get the best to get credibility. We got the best in you coming on the show, and it means a ton that you came to join us. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's great to see you.
Absolutely. Glad to be back talking hockey with you guys.
Awesome. Talk to you later, Patrick. Enjoy the rest of the playoffs.
Appreciate it, my friend. Thank you.
And before we do go, Ken, I got to get your thoughts on this. I know that our audience made it clear with some of the last shows we've done. We want to make sure that we're bringing in the experts to talk about it. And that means doing some shows, and that's all over the place. But one of the things that we need to make sure we do is get our own thoughts in here. I just wanted to get your idea and offer a good old buffet to Ken for an idea of what he's expecting up here in Game 3 and what Manitoba can do to turn this series.
Yeah, I was really impressed, like I said. Whether it starts at the top, Mark Morrison set the tone right from their first practice. I wasn't down at the Ice Bucks, but I listened to the majority of the availabilities. He just set a very calm tone. Although he knows his group needs more, there isn't any panic. And he said it right away. He said, this isn't a best of 7 series when you're down 3-0 and need to win 4. In a best of 5, things can turn in a snap of a finger. If the Moose win 1, all of a sudden, now you plant the seed of doubt. And if you can get to Game 4, now suddenly the old snowball is rolling down the Avalanche here. So for me, I think it started at the top. You heard it from the players. Obviously, there's some element of message tracking in the playoffs, but you can't fake belief, Sean. We've all been in those rooms where sometimes it's 2-0 and the team knows that it's over. That to me isn't the case with the Manitoba Moose. During the course of the year, they've won 3 games or more 6 different times. And again, part of that streak was 2 wins over the Milwaukee Admirals. So again, is it going to be easy for them to come back and win 3 in a row? Of course not. If it were easy, they wouldn't be down 2-0. But at the same time, if you're Mark Morrison, you can go in that room saying your team deserved at least a split, and you could just as easily be up 2-0. He knows that he has some offensive weapons that have not been able to get going offensively yet. He knows he has a group that he can lean on. There's good leaders, there's good young players, there's guys who can elevate their game, and I would expect the Moose to deliver an impressive performance. And they were 4th in the NHL in home ice wins during the course of the year. I think the stat was 7. I think they had it with Hustler's show. It's over 700 they played at home in terms of winning percentage. I would expect them to be very sharp. I would expect guys like Ville Heinola to have a massive game here this evening. We heard it from Morgan Barron when he came down. His goal is to win the Calder Cup. His goal isn't just to go through the motions for 2 weeks and get ready for an extended off-season vacation. This group has sort of had a stick-together kind of attitude all year long. I would expect them to play their best game of the year, and I would expect Mikhail Burton to be the guy that needs to make the saves that are directed his way. And if they can get to Devin Cooley, then who knows what can happen. I'm expecting an entertaining game. Again, as the conductor of the Gus bus, I'm looking forward to seeing him live for the first time this season. And I expect David to be a big driver in this game here this evening. He knows that he doesn't want his playoffs to be over after 3 games. And yeah, I just think the Moose are going to have a solid effort. They'll be prepared. They'll be ready. And it should be a fun atmosphere here this evening.
I think Mark Morrison made a phenomenally important point, and that point being a Game 5 series, being down 2-0 in a Game 5 series is miles different from being down 3-0 in a Game 7 series. And I've always said this before. There's no doubt about it. All the pressure lies squarely on the shoulders of the Manitoba Moose tonight. But if the Manitoba Moose can win tonight, then it's always been my belief that Game 4, the pressure entirely shifts to the other team, because now they're in a situation where if they lose that next game, suddenly they're going into a winner-take-all game in the opposition team's barn, and all the momentum is gone. And if you do that in this series, in a series where that team may just feel like they snuck away with Game 1 and Game 2, then all of a sudden, if you can win this one, you leave that opposing team with the feeling that, well, we're up 2-1 in this series, But boy, oh boy, if we lose this next one, we hand over all the momentum. But really, we've probably been outplayed in all 3 games in this series. And maybe we just woke up that monster. The other part that you're talking about is the calm nature by which the Manitoba Moose coaching staff, Mark Morrison, have handled this. Reminds me of the talk that happened on Hockey Night in Canada last night about the Leafs and Sheldon Keefe. I too was impressed. I thought they did a good job of kind of showing how calmly he handled that situation. And this is a team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, through what they've been through for as long as they've been through with all these first round exits, have reason to panic. And I think when you are that stoic as a coach, I think the nerves of the Toronto Maple Leafs showed in that first round. But if you can continue to show that belief, eventually, if your players, can get their feet underneath them in that game, that belief starts paying off. And Derek Meech brought up belief. I believe Patrick brought up belief. The thing we keep hearing time and time again is this Moose team believes in itself. Having a calm, cool hand at the rudder of this ship, I think, is going to, I put it this way, I think the coaches have done everything that they could do to put the Manitoba Moose in a good spot here. We'll see if they can take advantage of it. And boy, oh boy, look out with your ball.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny. I mean, Patrick talked about my coverage of the American League, but in my first year on the beat, back in the 2001 International Hockey League Turner Cup playoffs, the Moose were down 3-1 to the Houston Aeros, and they got a double overtime win in Game 6 and then won on the road again in Game 7. It was one of those memorable series early on in your coverage of the career. Similar kind of about it. It just reminded this team again, totally different leagues. That was a veteran team, everything else, but the Moose kind of have the components to kind of rally the same way that they did in 2001. And now we'll see if they can take the first step in that process.
Excellent stuff. I want to thank all our guests who joined us. Dave Minuk from Legal Curve, Derek Meech from the Manitoba Moose, and of course Patrick Williams from AHL.com. I want to thank you again for your expertise. I know you're in your element down there, and looking forward to enjoying yourself tonight. I hope you do so. And for everyone who joined us in the chat room, we obviously have a lot of recognizable faces and names here. We really appreciate you really along for the ride. We're trying to find ways to weigh in more and add more content. We really appreciate that you've been there to consume it. Thank you so much. Enjoy the game tonight, everybody, and we hope to talk to you all soon.